All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Inside Writing. This show is presented by Gotham Writers, offering classes of all types and sizes. You can visit us at gothamwriters.com. Before we get started, a few announcements. At any point in the show, you can use the Q&A function on your Zoom dashboard to submit questions for our panelists. Again, that's right there in your Zoom dashboard where you see the chat as well. And the chat is for general discussion. We ask that you keep your general discussion in the chat and your questions in the Q&A. And the Q&A, again, that's for discussion-based questions. So any questions that you want to have posed to the panelists later on in the show. Also, if you want to get caught up on any episodes of Inside Writing from season 1 or 2, or our current season, season 3, you can find them all on Gotham Writers' YouTube channel or on any major podcasting platform. And while you're there, like us, subscribe, leave a review. It helps to spread the word. So now onto the subject of the day, which is changing mediums or writing across multiple mediums. We're going to start with a quote, an abbreviated quote from Robert Heinlein, who said, "A human being should be able to change a diaper, design a building, write a sonnet, balance accounts, set a bone, cooperate, act alone, solve equations, analyze a new problem, cook a tasty meal, fight efficiently, die gallantly. Specialization is for insects." We're going to talk more about that later. But now we're going to meet our panelists. Our first panelist, a TV writer who's worked on such shows as You and The Flight Attendant, the writer of such plays as What Are You Worth and Welcome to Fear City, as well as the author of the novels Daughters of Jubilation and The Truth of Right Now, Kara Lee Corthron. Hello, Kara.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for being here today.
Happy to be here.
Our second panelist, a former musician who has recorded with the likes of Nick Cave, Iggy Pop, Debbie Harry, and more, as well as the author of the novels The Serpent King, Goodbye Days, Rain and Delilah's Midnight Matinee, and In the Wild Light, Jeff Zentner. Hello, Jeff.
Hello, it's wonderful to be with you.
Thank you both for being here. So we're going to start the questioning with Jeff. Jeff, I'm curious, you used to be a country music artist. When did you decide to make the change to writing fiction, and why?
Yeah, so I spent the greater part of my 20s engaged in music, trying to live the dream of being a professional musician here in Nashville. And I had a great time. Things were going really well. And then one night at age 30, I was lying there in bed and I had one of those moments where the universe just opens its windows to you. You have one of those sudden moments of epiphany. And the epiphany I had was that very few musicians I loved and listened to had made it big in music after age 30. I tried to think of any who had done so, and I couldn't think of any. I guess Leonard Cohen did, but I was no Leonard Cohen and am no Leonard Cohen. So that made me realize that I might have missed my window of opportunity to make it big as a musician. So with that dream having thoroughly died, and I plugged away at it for a few more years before I really packed it in. But with that dream dead, I decided to try to pass the dream along to somebody who could do with it what I could not. So I started volunteering at a music camp for teenagers called Tennessee Teen Rock Camp, and a sister group called Southern Girls Rock Camp. And at these camps, I really fell in love with young adults, young adulthood, and specifically the way that young adults love the art that they love. There's something really special about that time in your life. I know it was for me, where you glom onto the art that you love. You allow it to be part of your identity and part of the way you relate to the world. And it occurred to me that that would be a really cool audience to create art for. But I didn't know how to make the kind of music that got marketed to young adults. I was certainly too old to be making the kind of music that gets marketed to young adults. So I had to find a new medium that would allow me to reach that audience. So I started looking around for mediums that were a little more forgiving of my advanced age of 35. And publishing turned out to be the trick. You can publish books in your 50s, 60s, 70s. There's not quite the expiration date of music. So that was the way I saw forward to reaching an audience of young adults with art. I like to tell folks that if it had been juggling that would allow me to reach a young adult audience, I'd be a juggler right now. I really followed the audience to the and not the form. So It took a little doing to make that switch because I grew up in a rural area and I'd never met a published author before age 33, and it just didn't seem like the kind of thing that people like me did. So that's kind of how I made the decision to switch over.
So you made a lot of points I want to get back to, but I want to hear from Kara. And Kara, you still actively switch between mediums. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you're still engaged in like TV, playwriting, book. Where did you start, and how did you find your way into these different mediums?
Well, I guess I officially started as a playwright. Way back when I actually was studying to be an actor because I thought I was going to do that and kind of burnt out on that. But one of the reasons I ended up writing for the stage was because I got really tired of being asked to audition for material that I thought was terrible. And I just thought I could do better than that. And I'm not a writer. I mean, just really, I won't even tell you, some really bad stuff. So originally I thought maybe I'll write and perform my own things. And then I did that. I started writing and I was like, oh no, that's way too vulnerable. I think I'm going to write for other people. Oh, then I'm a playwright. Like it really took me that long to kind of come around to realize that's what I was doing. And the funny thing is I always wanted to write in some form. I just wasn't always sure what, which I think is why now I write in several, because I still can't decide. Because I actually wrote my first young adult novel when I was in my low 20s. Just on a whim. I was inspired by an idea and I just kind of wrote like a crazy person. And I had this manuscript that my sister, who's lovely and totally supportive, she had a friend at Simon & Schuster. She's like, let's let her look at it. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was like, sure. It was not ready for that at all. And I'd kind of forgotten about it. And a few months later, I got this letter, which was a 2-page single-spaced rejection letter breaking down everything that was wrong with the book. In the last paragraph, she suggested that I find another field, another path in life. So I thought, oh, I can't do that, I guess. I'll do something else. So, I went where, I found some traction, which was in playwriting. I was fortunate enough to get into the Juilliard School, which really made me take myself more seriously as a playwright. And once I was getting more into playwriting, I was realizing, oh, people in playwriting often move to TV to make a living because it's really hard to make a living as a playwright in this country, as you might know. So that was when I started kind of learning a little bit more about the form of TV and how to start transitioning. But in the meantime, I thought, I guess at that point, a decade had passed since that awful rejection letter. And I was like, that could have been a girl in a really bad mood that wrote me that nasty letter. I can't let her dictate my life. And I've always wanted to write a book. So I tried again, and that ended up being The Truth of Right Now, which was my book that debuted in 2017 for young adults as well. That's an audience that I'm definitely drawn to as well. I think, unlike Jeff, I think it's because I'm not really that mature. I think some part of me is still that age, so I really get it a little too well. I think there's some over-identification happening. But yeah, I think I would just be really bored and unsatisfied if I tried to just do one thing. So that's why I move around, and it's exhausting. No lie. I get tired and frustrated, and often why am I doing this? This is madness. But I think artistically, it's the best way for me to be fulfilled.
And Kara, to follow up on that, what you actively write stories in novel form and play form. What makes you choose one over the other? If you have a story idea, what makes you say this is a novel or this is a play?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I've been a little bit flatlined on playwriting lately. I've just been I don't know if I have another play in me. I think part of that has been the pandemic and seeing people move to virtual theater, which does not interest me at all. So I've been kind of taking a little bit of a step back to think, do I want to keep doing that? But I think that as far as when I choose to write something, writing a play is something when I really want the material to intimately connect with an audience that's in the same room. If it's something where I feel 100 people in this room will appreciate this in a particular way and we'll all feel like we had an experience, that feels like a play to me. That feels very theatrical. Whereas with a novel, it's an opportunity to go really deep in the interior. If I want to explore a character's thoughts, their mind, the things that they're not presenting to the outside world, it feels perfect to do that in novel form. But ultimately, as far as just writing an interesting story, I don't think they're that different. I feel like writing a good story kind of transcends form.
And that's going to be a question I ask later on down the road. So we're going to come back to that thought. But
cool.
Jeff, I want to hear from you. Do you feel like your experience as a songwriter, did it carry over to your prose in any way? Do you feel like there was some transition that stuck with you?
A little bit, to be sure. In some ways, it was bad for me because songs don't necessarily need to have an arc. They don't need to have characters don't need to go on a journey in a song. A song can be kind of just a snapshot. At one point in time, the protagonist of a song can be sad at the beginning of a song and sad at the end of the song, and there doesn't have to be any movement. So that was a little bit of a trick to learn. Also, it was a little bit of a trick to try to learn to sustain an idea over longer than 4 or 5 minutes, which is what a pretty decent length song is. There were some things that carried over, though. Certainly in music, you have to choose your words very carefully. You choose your words for the music of the words. Sometimes you'll work a certain phrase or a certain sentence just over and over and over. And I feel like that attention to detail, that attention to the sentence level, to the word level, was something I was able to carry through into my writing. And I think that served me well in that sense. Taking a step back, though, I think what songwriting really did for me was it taught me that while I may love all different kinds of music, all different genres, etc., there is a type of song that I write. There is a type of story that I tell, and I don't need to try to write every kind of song, you know? So that was an important lesson for writing books. I can like many, many different kinds of books, and I do, but not every kind of book is a story that I write. I write a certain kind of story. I write in a certain tonal register. And I'm going to be most successful in telling the stories I want to tell if I know the emotional and tonal register that I work in. That's what songwriting kind of imparted.
Kara, from your experience, do you see carryover from like, you know, your playwriting into your novel writing, vice versa, including your TV writing? Do you see crossover there?
Yeah, I mean, the two that are most connected to me, because they're both often character language based, is TV and playwriting. I feel like it's a much easier transition to go from playwriting to TV as opposed to film, which actually I'm also writing a horror movie in the process, which is it's fun. It's its own new challenge. I'm like, oh, this is different than TV. So you know, one more thing. But yeah, what was the first part of the question?
Just if there's any carryover, like do you take stuff that you learn in playwriting and apply it to novel writing?
Well, yeah, because I feel like once I write kind of a raw first draft of something, either a novel or a play, for example, my process going back is pretty similar for both. Like the first time I go back, I want to read through to make sure the whole thing makes sense. Like, is there actually a clear arc? Am I getting from one place to another? Are there major holes that are just like, what is that? And also like logic, does logic follow? And then I go back through again to be like, is this a compelling story? Like, yeah, now it makes sense, but is it actually interesting and exciting? And I do that for both. Like I do that, and even, you know, to a lesser extent with the TV script. So I feel like the things that are most important are always going to be consistent. At least that's what I have come to learn. And then the rest of it is kind of cosmetic as far as, you know, style changes for the format, because there are obviously a lot more rules that you have to follow with television than, say, a novel. And that just comes with like practice and doing it over and over again. But yeah, I mean, it's really funny. I'll just give a quick weird example. Sometimes a different genre helps me when I'm struggling in one. Like yesterday, I'm working on a pitch for adapting my novel into a TV series right now. So I'm working on pitching it, which is really a pain in the everywhere. It is really, really hard and exhausting. But I was trying to find a relationship between these two particular characters that wasn't coming off in the pitch yet. So I actually sat down and I wrote a play, like a scene between them as if they were in a play. And it actually helped unlock some things, which was really useful. Now that scene I'm never going to be able to use because it's not for a play. It's going to eventually way down the line be, a pilot script. But I was able to actually use that to gain information that I needed. So sometimes I'm able to like use the different pieces of my crafts to help the other.
Mm-hmm. And Jeff, I want to revisit something you mentioned earlier. You were talking about how you felt like your music career wasn't working for you, so you switched to novel writing. So I'm curious, why has novel writing come? I don't want to say so easily because I feel like that downplays, but you've had tremendous success as a novelist. So what do you feel like the difference was? What made you find this medium so much more accessible?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what it is. I mean, I think the easier answer may be that I'm just a better novelist than I was as a musician. I came to music kind of late. Came to it when I was 19, which is late. Most people get an earlier start on it. Maybe it was just a matter of craft. I've been reading since I was 3 and just read so many books. So I might have been building that up. But I think too, I'm able to bring a bigger part of myself to novel writing. So I think humor is an important part of my books. And my music was so dour and humorless. I mean, just, you can't imagine what a bummer my music was to listen to. Like at day jobs, people have been like, hey, Jeff can get out his guitar and play at the office Christmas party. I'm like, oh no, you don't have any idea how much that would just bum everyone out. Everyone would just want to die if I did that. Very sad music. My whole philosophy about music was like, Townes Van Zandt, but way more depressing because Townes Van Zandt isn't depressing enough. So I don't know. It might be that. It might be that you tend to be most successful at art that you can bring your fullest self to. Maybe it's that I have a clearer idea with writing novels, who I'm writing for and who I want to reach, and that passion may come through. I never had a clear idea of who my audience as a musician was, other than like 40 or 50 Eastern Europeans with PhDs in psychology and clinical depression. That was kind of my core audience. So I can't really account for it. I don't know. I will say that I am just truly enjoying the ride I'm on. I'm going to be 43 next week, and there, by no right whatsoever, should I be enjoying kind of the most fulfilling creative period in my life right now. I feel like, especially having come late to writing, I just feel so profoundly lucky. And so I approach writing with a lot of joy and just like, hey, if I died tomorrow, I would feel like I'd lived a pretty good life because of this. So I don't know, maybe that comes through. I don't know. That's a good question. So
I do want to follow. Go ahead, Kara.
Oh no, I said wow, and I was going to say happy almost birthday.
Yes, happy almost birthday.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm definitely to the age where I don't really celebrate birthdays anymore, but I certainly appreciate that. You're too kind.
Maybe celebrate a little bit.
All right.
So Jeff, I want to follow up on that thought real quick and then get back to Kara. So Jeff, do you feel like you're a better novelist? I think I know the answer to this, but do you feel like you're a better novelist because you went through that period of songwriting? Did that prepare you to be a better novelist than you were a songwriter?
Oh yeah, 100%. It taught me to understand that not all art is for everybody. So not to try to please everybody, because you're not ever going to be able to do that. It taught me patience. It taught me that you have to work with things. It taught me that you're going to have missteps and misfires. And it, I think it was good in that sense. I think it was very helpful in that sense. It taught me discipline. It taught me the importance of craft. I mean, it was a really good thing. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Kara, what about you? Do you feel like you're a better writer because you've dabbled in so many forms? Does that help you improve your writing craft overall?
Yeah. I feel like I get better and better all the time, which is cool. It's good, but it also gets to the point where I start to think, was I a terrible writer like 2 years ago? Like it just becomes like this weird comparison, like relativity game that's like confusing. Like, oh God, I didn't know any of this like even a month ago. But I'm trying to like think of it as a good thing. I think that like it's just the more that I push myself to think in different ways and respond to different kinds of feedback. And also that's the other thing that's interesting is that when I'm writing a young adult novel, my audience, it's a very specific audience, but like writing a TV show, it's a different kind of audience, even though that age group is absolutely under that umbrella. So there are just so many different concerns and things to be aware of. But yeah, I think it definitely helps my writing. And sometimes I'm like, okay, I don't need to get that good. Let's take a breath. But I think it's very helpful.
So I want to talk about the actual process of writing now, especially when it comes to writing between different mediums. Kara, do you approach stories differently based on what medium you're telling them in? Like, do you approach a novel the same way you'd approach a play?
That's such a good question. Kind of. I mean, I feel like with a play, I tend to think a little bit more outside first, like kind of the external structure. Like the play that you mentioned, What Are You Worth, is a play in like 3 distinct acts, and each takes place 400 years after the other. So it kind of goes over the space of like over 800 years. And I had this idea before I wrote it that I wanted to try that. So it was basically like I had like a little bit of a building structure in my mind. And then I was like, can I fit the content into that structure and make it make sense? Whereas with a book, it tends to be more about the characters first. Like I might have a general concept of something that interests me or concerns me or scares me, because I often write about things that scare me. But before I can really do anything, I have to have a sense of my protagonist's voice and who that person is. And when I start kind of playing around in that, and if I feel like, oh yeah, I need to know where this goes, then I feel like, okay, this might be a book. But I usually have to get to that place first before I settle on if I'm going to actually spend, because it's a long time. It's a long time to spend to write a book. So I have to make sure that I feel a certain love for my main character first.
Mm-hmm. And quick follow up there. Have you ever started a story as a play or as a novel and decided it's actually going to be better off in the other medium? Does that ever happen?
You know what's weird? No. And it's weird to me that it hasn't. It seems like it would have. Yeah. No, but I bet it will.
All right. So Jeff, I want to get and you kind of touched on this already a little bit, but how does your approach to novel writing, how does it differ from whenever you used to sit down to write a song? How do you approach it differently?
There were more entry points to writing a song. So a song could come from, so there are kind of 2 components of a song. There's the musical component, and then there's the lyrical component. And those were my 2 big entry points. I would be just kind of fooling around with the guitar, and I'd come up with a chord structure I liked. And then I would come up with lyrics to kind of hammer into the chord structure, something that fit the feel and the tone of the chord structure, and the lyrics would meet the chord structure. Other times it would start with just like a line of poetry, essentially, a line or an idea I wanted to express. I guess there's 3 entry points, because there's music, there's idea, and then there's line, which can express an idea, but didn't always. So I'd start with a line, and I would come up with music to fit that line. Where with novels, really, my big entry point is character. Every one of my novels, I have to start with someone who fascinates me in a situation that fascinates me, somebody who I want to get to know, a life I want to inhabit. So there are fewer, I guess, entry points to the novel. Although, you know, I've written 4 so far. I may discover down the line that my process changes and that my entry points to a novel change. But so far, I've never once had the sort of thing where I come up with a plot first and then figure out characters to fill out and inhabit that plot. And I'm sure there's folks who do that, but I'm such a plot weak writer. I'm just not great with plot. I'm not great with big twists and, you know, your save the cat kind of plot beats. And that's just not really my thing. It's all very character driven. And so that's always got to be the entry point.
So I want to linger on this idea of structure, how you approach things, and sort of transition into talking about your routine and your writing routine and how that maybe changes between mediums. So Jeff, starting with you, did you have, like, you know, you mentioned for writing a song, sometimes you just be playing the guitar. How has your writing routine changed from writing songs to writing novels? Do you set aside time still, or just, yeah, how has your routine evolved between changing mediums?
Well, one thing about the new medium of writing is that there are financial and legal pressures to create, because I'm now under contract to people where with my music, nobody cared if I released an album. I was beholden to nobody. And that wasn't great for me. It was a little too much freedom. And so I was a little too loosey-goosey in my, I guess, work ethic or discipline. As it is now, I'm pretty regimented in terms of my writing process. I start a book by envisioning characters. I let those characters incubate in my mind for a good 3 or 4 months, just really, really getting to know them. Because my cheat for writing a book is essentially letting the characters write the book for me. I have no ability to sit across from another human being and say to them, let me tell you who you are. Let me tell you who you love, who loves you, what you desire, what you fear, all of those things that make you a story embodied in human form. What I do have the capacity to do is sit across from you and listen while you tell me who you are. Then I can kind of write that down, and it kind of naturally ends up to take on a story-like structure. And so I try to do that with the fictional characters I create. I try to let them incubate in my mind until they're real enough people that I can sort of sit across from them and interrogate them about their story. So once I have that, there's a lot of thinking to my writing, because I have to be really efficient with my writing time. I still have a day job. I've always had a day job all through all of my creative processes. For my first 3 books, I was actually working as a prosecutor for the state of Tennessee. So I would write my books. Yeah, I know all about murder, Kara. If you ever need any legal questions, reach out. I am a murder expert.
You may hear from me.
Please do. This is not a joke. I'd be perfectly happy to help you with anything. So I would write on the bus to and from work on my iPhone. This iPhone right here, I wrote my first 3 books on. I would edit at home on my laptop because it's very hard to edit on a phone. But for just the raw drafting, getting the words down on the page, right thumb, baby, just all the way into work. So that would give me about an hour and 10 minutes a day of writing time. And I had to make the most of that. I'd try to get between 500 words and 1,000 words if I could. I do go long periods of time without writing a thing, though. That is to say, I go long periods of time without putting words on paper. I have a very expansive view of writing, though. I consider consuming stories to be writing, because that's writing input. I consider thinking about stories to be writing. I consider myself to be on the clock when I'm doing that. So I'll go, 7-8 months without putting a word on a page, as I'm letting the well refill between books, which is something I kind of have to do. And I'm just sort of thinking and meditating on waiting, got the antenna up for new transmissions from characters who want to come into the light of existence.
I like that. So Kara, same question to you. What is your routine like, and does it differ depending on what you're writing?
Yeah, my routine definitely differs because my schedule differs. Like, for instance, right now, I'm in a room for a TV show called Servant, which is like a horror TV show on Apple TV. And my boss is M. Night Shyamalan, and who's a great boss, but he's doing a lot of different things. So his schedule fluctuates. So every day, it's almost like I'm a doctor. I'm waiting to find out if M's going to have time to talk to us. Like right now, supposedly we're going to meet at noon, but that could change at any time. So while I'm working on my other things, like for instance, I'm working on this pitch and I'm working on the screenplay, I have to kind of figure out when makes most sense for me to work on those things based on the fact that I may have to stop everything and go into this room to talk about this particular TV show. So I have to be really flexible. I mean, that's actually not normal. Like typically if you're in a room, you just have a set schedule. Like we meet every day at 10, blah, blah, blah. This has just been a little bit unique with this particular show. But yeah, like I mean, in a way, it kind of makes sense that I've ended up with this weird schedule because I've never been that disciplined about keeping a set schedule. Like, I'm really good about meeting my deadlines and knowing that, you know, if I'm going to meet such and such, I need to write at least an hour and a half a day for this. I'm good at like kind of planning in that sense, but I've never been somebody that's like, I get up every day at dawn and I write 5 pages and I have breakfast. Like, I just don't think that way. So, I feel like, yeah, I'm always kind of on the fly about it, but because the one thing that's kind of cool about this job is that even though it's very much we meet when we have to kind of just be prepared, we don't tend to meet that long once we do. So like once it's done, then I usually have the rest of my day to figure out how to do my own work. But yeah, like and you know, once this contract ends, it'll be totally different. So it's because of the itinerant nature of TV writing, it kind of just depends.
And does it make it harder to write your own creative writing, knowing that at any moment you could be interrupted? Like, does that help you?
Yeah, it's not awesome. I mean, I think because I'm just aware of it now, so I have to kind of just set my mind in a particular space. Like, for instance, maybe there's like a question, like a particular note that I'm trying to ponder over. I'll try and think about that and maybe make notes on that while I know that I could be called up at any moment. And then after we actually have that meeting, then I'll go and do some more like creative writing where I can just kind of like let myself go. So I just have to kind of really parse out the kind of work that I do based on interruptions that could happen at any time.
And Jeff, from your point of view, both with having a day job and with also having, you know, deadlines, you know, you are agented, you're usually on a schedule. Does that work better for you with your writing? You mentioned how, you know, having all the freedom in the world wasn't the best for you. What makes deadlines so much easier to foster creativity?
I mean, it turns out I just need to have the wolves at my heels. You know, I have to have the fire at my back. I have to be, I just work better with deadlines. I don't know. In my day job, in law, we work with a lot of deadlines. They're tight deadlines. They're important deadlines. If you blow a deadline, you know, sometimes the stakes are literally life and death. So to me, they're just very important. And I just I love working with restraints. I love working in a box. And I know that sounds strange, but it reminds me of an interview I read with Jack White of the White Stripes, where the White Stripes was a very limited band. It was a guitarist and a drummer, no bass player. So they were really limited as to the kind of music they could do. And plus, Meg White was not a terribly versatile drummer. I mean, she kind of learned drumming to play with that band. So it's not like she had jazz chops and stuff that they could, you know, do a jazz cover or what have you. And he talked about how freeing that was in a way to have those restraints, to have those restrictions. And I also find it freeing in the same way. I find having a deadline freeing in the sense that, oh, right, I don't need to try to write, you know, a 1,200-page historical epic about New Zealand in the 1820s where I go and travel and live in New Zealand for 6 years. I just can't do that. It's not available to me. So I'm going to write what's available to me. I'm going to write what I can. And I find that freeing. I find it freeing to work with the stories that are available to me.
Mm-hmm. So I want to shift gears a bit and talk about what it means to have a brand as a writer. You know, we so often hear that as a writer, you should be able to identify your brand and what it is that you bring. So Jeff, I want to hear from you first. Do you feel like you have an identifiable brand that if I said, Jeff, what's your brand, you would have an answer? And when did you really discover that?
Yeah, I absolutely do. It sounds cheesy to talk about cultivating a brand and whatnot. I mean, it's something we resist, and, you know, like how musicians always resist being categorized in a genre, like, no, man, you can't put me in a box. But you know, at the end of the day, you have a brand, and mine is, I write country songs in the form of books. I write young adult books about outcast kids growing up in rural Tennessee, which is, the upbringing that I experienced. It's what I know. And I write what I know, again, because I'm not the world's most versatile writer. And I know that about myself, because I know from music that there's a kind of story I tell, and there's a kind of story that interests me, and there's a kind of story that I can sustain and that I can do well. And that's what's important to me. So yeah, I think I absolutely have a brand. I think I probably have a brand with the way I interact with my readers and friends online. It's not something that I give a lot of thought to, but it is something that exists and something that's kind of arisen organically. And I do think about it when I go to write my next book. I mean, I'm not one of those writers who's going to try to throw you a curveball with every single book I write. It's not like I'm going to follow up a book about a coming of age story about teenagers in rural Tennessee with a sci-fi epic in the vein of Frank Herbert's Dune or something like. That's just not me. It's just not what I'm going to do.
Kara, what about you? Do you feel like you have an identifiable brand that you can easily convey? And is that important?
Yeah, I think it actually is important. I'm not sure if it's easily identifiable for me. I mean, what I would say, I guess, is, and this is totally just based on accumulation of the stuff that I tend to do, is creepy, quirky Black girl is kind of my brand. I do a lot of horror, but also a lot of social justice stuff. I mean, it kind of all comes together, and also some like weird, funny stuff too. I don't know. It's probably something I need to like work on. Like Jeff, I don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about it, but yeah, it's kind of important. So it's there. It's there. Maybe somebody will tell me, and then I'll be like, okay, that's my brand.
I think that's the deal with it. I think I think it exists, but somebody has to tell you what it is. You're not allowed to tell other people what it is.
And then like, oh, that's what it is. Okay.
So I'm curious then, so would you tell writers that are worried they don't have a brand, would you tell them, don't worry about it, it'll come eventually? Like, Kara, let's start with you.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's path and trajectory is different in this business. Like, just every time I talk to someone, I'm like, oh, that happened for you that way? Okay. Who knows? The only thing that you can control is your work. So I feel like what's most important is to write a lot and write really fucking well. Like, that's the thing that you can control, and that's the thing to be concerned about. The other stuff that comes later.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I absolutely could not agree more with that. It's at the end of the day, the work is all that matters, and whatever arises organically from that arises. There is not a giant crank that you can turn faster to sell more books. There is not a giant crank that you can turn faster to make more people like you, or to suddenly have your brand be, whatever on the rise. So yeah, end of the day, it's the work that matters.
So one other concept we've discussed on the show before, and I want to hear your takes on this, is this belief that you should stay in your lane as a writer, which I feel like it's a controversial thing, but it is something you see a lot of people say, particularly for getting started. When you first start, find your lane, stay in it. But I'm curious, Kara, you especially with the path that you took, what's your thought on staying in your lane? Should you master a craft before you move on to another one?
I don't know. I mean, I hear this so much, the stay in your lane thing, and I get it. I'll just say from my perspective, I tried that for a while. And, and I think I was able to build my craft because I was very focused on writing great plays. Like, this is what I do. And what I realized was that as a career, playwriting is super limited, and it's all about scarcity. Like, there are only so many stages in the fucking world. So, I wasn't getting produced because there was nowhere to produce me. And I thought, wow, I should maybe do something else instead of just sitting around hoping that one day I'll get an email or a phone call, because that was what I was doing for quite a while. So for me, it was more about diversifying so that I could keep working and keep being creative and keep putting kind of what I wanted to put out into the world. So, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I think manage your expectations, because for me, I was like, this is not fulfilling and I'm not getting anywhere by staying in this particular lane. I need to take an exit off of the highway. So I think it's just different for everybody.
Mm-hmm. I like that you continued the metaphor with the highway.
Oh, thanks.
Jeff, what about you? What are your thoughts on this stay in your lane idea?
Yeah, I agree with what Kara said. There are truly as many ways to be a writer and to exist as a writer as there are writers. And it's always kind of thrilling to do talks like this with another writer and get to see their process and how they approach it. Obviously I didn't stay in my lane artistically. Like, I took actually kind of a big shift by switching from music to books. So in that sense, changing lanes pretty radically worked for me. Now, there's another sense in which we talk about staying in your lane, which is kind of writing within the breadth of your experience and kind of writing what you know. And I will say, with regard to that's where I've had the most success. I don't purport to tell all authors that they have to do that or that that's the only way to do things, but I'll say that for me, that has worked best. That has been the way that I've been able to tell the richest story, because there are certain types of characters that I know, and I know them very deeply, and I know them so deeply as to be able to create a very nuanced and sensitive portrayal of those characters. And I know the milieus they live in well enough to create a very sensitive and nuanced recreation of those milieus. And that, I feel like, has worked very well for me. I think if I can toot my own horn, one of the things that people find in my books is a certain sense of realism and a certain sense of tangibility to the characters. And I think that I would not be able to achieve that if I was writing wildly outside my lane in that sense. So I think there are many different senses in which we can use the term stay in your lane. And I've kind of dealt in both ways by switching from music to books, but then once within books, mostly staying within my lane. And I found that works out pretty well. And again, that is in some ways a limitation, yes. But as I said before, I embrace limitation and I find it freeing. And I find that there are a lot of stories to tell, more than I'll ever be able to tell with the remaining years of my life within my lane. So I'm perfectly happy to tell those stories.
So you brought up another quote, the write what you know, that I wanted to ask about as well. So Kara, I'm curious, is your policy on write what you know, do you see it as the same kind of thing as stay in your lane?
I feel kind of a few different ways about write what you know. I think that write what you know is great. However, I also think it can limit people in not a great way. I think, and I've also, if I used to teach a lot, I've encountered this with students, is that it can be an excuse to not really know anything else. Whereas it's like, why don't you also broaden your perspectives and broaden your life and meet different kinds of people and experience different kinds of things? I think write what you know is great as long as you keep learning and know that you need to know a lot of things to be a fully fledged human being, not just, I know this world from where I grew up and I know nothing else, so I'm not going to learn anything else like that. I don't think that really helps anyone. So I think write what you know, but get to know a lot. Sort of how I would see that.
So we've mentioned the concept of success a few times now. So I want to get both of your takes on what your idea of success is as a writer and how that's changed the more you've experimented with form. So Jeff, I want to start with you because you talked about how the reason you left songwriting was because you weren't seeing the success you wanted to see. So how has your definition of success changed from being a songwriter to now being an accomplished novelist?
Well, I kind of didn't know what success would look like as a musician. I hadn't sort of approached music with any kind of idea of this is what will qualify as success to me. It was one of those things where, like, I'll know it when I see it, With books, it was so much different because I set out wanting to make art for young adults, wanting to reach young adults. So every time I hear from a young adult that my work has reached them in some way, has moved them in some way, has impacted them in some way, to me, that's success. That's all I want. You can forget the awards, the New York Times bestseller list, all that stuff. That's all nice. That's all wonderful. I won't pretend like that stuff wouldn't be great. But at the end of the day, it's that Instagram message from a 17-year-old kid who was forced to read my book in their English class and ended up loving it. And it moved them in some way. It touched them in some way, reminded them of somebody they love, acted as a mirror to their own life, what have you. To me, that is my measure of success. So I guess to answer your question, my measure of success has changed from, I don't know what it is, but I'll know it when I see it. And, I guess if, I'm some massive Grammy winning artist, maybe that'll feel like success too. Yeah. I just want to reach some young adults and I'll call that good.
Kara, what about you? How has your definition of success changed through exploring different mediums?
Well, I hear to what you just said, Jeff, because there's really not a better feeling than getting a message from someone, a kid who's been really touched by your book. I remember getting an email, actually, it was an email from a girl, I think who was 15, who'd read my first book and was saying that how much it meant to her because she didn't really have any friends. So it was actually heartbreaking, but I was like, that's why you do it, like to actually give somebody some hope or to make them feel not so alone. So that for me is like, that's really what success is about. For a long time, I just felt like if I can write what I want to write and not be struggling or not, because, I lived in New York for many years and I was always sort of just hovering around the poverty line. and it got really old, like it really doesn't, it's not cute after a while. And so really for me, I was just like, I just want to not worry about rent. I want to be able to eat and write and feel okay. And I've definitely gotten to that place. So I absolutely feel like, I think calling myself a success feels weird because it feels like, it's like, oh, well, now I'm done. Now I should retire. And that's ridiculous. But by the same token, I feel like stepping back and looking at kind of the work that I've done and saying I'm not a success is a little bit ludicrous because I think I've been able to accomplish a lot of great things that I feel fortunate about.
So I have a few more questions I want to get to, but I want to get to some audience Q&A first. There's a remarkably small number today. So if you have your questions, get them in. This question, Kara, this one's for you. What resources can you recommend for a novelist interested in screenwriting for film and TV?
Oh, gosh. There are like tons and tons and tons. We brought it up, I think Jeff brought up as a joke, but I do think Save the Cat is a really great book. For if you want to write a screenplay, I think it's really, really useful. There's some weird examples in it that you might roll your eyes at, but if you can like get rid of that as far as just like the nuts and bolts of transferring your work, your content into a screenplay, I think it's super helpful.
I agree, by the way. It's a great book.
Oh. And I think he passed away recently, so like rest in peace, Blake Snyder. But I as you can see, I'm like, because there's so many resources out there, and there are lots of like workshops and things that you could. I mean, even like Gotham Writers, I'm sure has really good workshops that would help maybe make that transition. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question right. If you mean like educational resources but yeah, there are a million.
Gotcha. And then next question is also on the subject of TV writing. So Kara will ask you, what kind of experience do you need to get a job in a writer's room?
You need to have written some really good shit. I mean, honestly, if you have a really, really, really amazing sample that you can show to agents or managers, or like if you have a friend that has an agent that's like, can you flip this to them? And they like it, they're going to try and sell you. It's good to have more than one because they want to know that it's not just an accident, that you can write other things. But I mean, it goes back to what Jeff and I were saying, like it's all about the writing. Like if you write so well that you can't be ignored, they're going to want you because you're going to make them money. So get those scripts, make them kick ass. Make them kick ass and then show them to people so they know you're out there.
So there's another question here that I was going to ask as well. So I want to pose it to both of you, and it's about the subject of finding an agent and how to find the right agent. So actually, I want to ask Jeff first. Jeff, do you feel like in any way having that songwriting background helped you get an agent, or just in the fact that it helped who you were as a writer?
It just helped who I was as a writer. Well, I'll say this, songwriting is what made me realize I needed an agent. I needed professional help to get my work distributed widely, to get my work in front of gatekeepers, people who could put more eyes and ears on it. I tried to do everything on my own with music, and I realized that I'm not a business person. I'm not able to negotiate on my own. It's really remarkable. I've been a lawyer now for 15 years, and I would not feel comfortable negotiating my own book contract. My agent got me 12 times the amount for my first 2 books that I would have gladly settled for. So having an agent is really important. Being a songwriter didn't help me to get an agent, but it did make me realize that an agent and some help was necessary, and they add a lot of value to your creative enterprise.
Mm-hmm. And Kara, do you have different agents for different mediums, or what's your situation like, and how did you get there?
I have my book agent. I have an agent and manager for TV, and I also have a lawyer. This is the question that comes up so often, and I wish I had a better answer for it. Like, people that I know and friends of mine, they're still trying to find representation because it's not easy. It is not easy. But it goes back to what I was just saying a few minutes ago about your connections and building your community and making sure people know what you're writing and know that you're writing really well. If you can build a little bit of buzz about your name, all the better. For me, it's just my playwriting agent. That was my first agent that I signed with. She came to see a workshop of a play that when I was at Juilliard, when I was still in school, and wanted to represent me. It helped because my teacher, who was Christopher Durang, who's a very well-known playwright, he actually had recommended her. He's like, you should come and see the student's play. And then she came, and through her, she actually moved to a larger agency a few years later. And her colleague, who's a TV agent, asked, she's like, do you have any playwrights that you'd recommend to me? And he's like, oh, you should probably read Kara Corthron. And then he called me and was like, do you want to do TV? Because I think, you'd be good in this. So that kind of happened that way. And then 2 years ago, actually, prior to the, I don't want to get off on a tangent on this, but the WGA action where we all had to leave our agents, that's like a whole other can of worms. It's a whole other discussion. But that was when I got a manager because I needed somebody to kind of help me. And I actually met with many different managers. So I was lucky that I had a choice that I could make. So for me, it's like one of those things where once your community opens this much, then it starts to open more and more and more. So it's really about building those connections and making sure you write fabulously and that people know it.
And then, Kara, there's a follow-up to the question earlier about resources. They said, are there any resources that have been particularly helpful to you in your development?
Probably Save the Cat is really, like, I'm gonna tell you something about Save the Cat. Sometimes I take meetings that I'm like, oh, sure, I can do that. And then I'm like, I don't know can I really do that? And I took this meeting about this horror film for Warner Brothers. I was like, oh yeah, it's adapting actually a horror YA by another author. I was like, oh, that sounds great. And they're like, great. Can you write us an outline and pitch it to us? And I was like, sure. And then I was like, I don't know how to write an outline for a movie. That's not like TV. And then someone recommended that book, and I sped read it. And then from that, I built an outline, and then I was able to pitch it to Warner Brothers and got the job. So it helped me a lot. I don't know. I feel like, fake it till you make it is a sketchy thing to say because I've seen a lot of really bad things come of that. But if it's in you, you're going to find the resource that's going to help you, the thing that's going to get you there. Also, a lot of really great screenplays. If you're into horror or sci-fi, you have to read Alien by O'Bannon. Like, it's an amazing screenplay. That's why it's just there's so freaking many out there. So yeah, I don't know, man. You're gonna find it. I feel like if you like throw a coconut outside, you're gonna find a great screenwriting book if you want to. They're really around.
Jeff, as far as your development as a writer, have there been any resources or books that have particularly been helpful to you?
So Save the Cat was very helpful to me. I am plot weak. I will always be plot weak, but any success I have in plot and creating compelling plot beats, I would owe to the structure that book has given me. On Writing by Stephen King, just a real classic. The guy knows how to write. What can I say? I mean, he's a great writer. He's one of my favorite writers. He has written so many amazing, iconic books, and just, nobody knows more about the craft of creating great, compelling, emotionally resonant and commercial writing than Stephen King. Dreyer's English is written by my dear friend Benjamin Dreyer. It is a what would you call it? A style guide? I'm not sure. It teaches you how. It makes you a better writer. He's the copy chief at Random House. He teaches you copy editing. He teaches you words and phrases to avoid. He's coming out with another book called Dreyer's Fiction, which is going to be amazing. I've not read it yet, but it's going to be one of the best writing resources out there. I just know. So those would be kind of my big recommendations.
And also, since we're getting broader, thank you for doing that, because I was thinking about screenwriting. I got stuck in there. But Writing Down the Bones by Natalie Goldberg, which is also a classic, wonderful, tons of essays on craft, but also inspiration. And she goes through a lot of her own mistakes that she was making when she was first starting out, and gives you alternatives. It's really inspiring. She wrote a book later called Thunder and Lightning, which I also like, but Writing Down the Bones, I think, is the best one.
Mm-hmm.
And here's another resource that I think people don't think to go to a lot, but I have found a lot of value thinking about story in podcasts that review movies and that break down story in movies. So some of my favorites there's one called Blank Check, where these two guys, Griffin Newman, an actor, and David Sims, a writer for The Atlantic, look at filmographies of directors who have been given a blank check at some point in their career to kind of do whatever they want. So like Robert Zemeckis makes Back to the Future. Now he's got a blank check to do whatever he wants. What do they do with that blank check? So they look at the arc of not only individual movies within a creative career, but the arc of movies over a creative career, and then the creative career itself, which is very, very interesting. I listened to a podcast called How Did This Get Made that talks about terrible movies and what works and what doesn't work about, you know the one, Kara?
So much fun. Yes.
It's so funny. And you learn a lot about what works in a story by listening to people talk about what doesn't work in a story. Terrible. So that's a great one. And another one that I've just recently started listening to with Gorley and Rust, with Matt Gorley and Paul Rust. I guess they're two comedians, improv comedians, writers. But they break down horror movies. And again, they're so funny. They're so insightful. And you learn a lot about what works and what doesn't in story by listening to very smart people break down what works and what doesn't work for them in a story.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
So very last thing before I let you go, I if you have anything to promote, any books that you want to promote, plays, where people can find you on social media or on the internet. Kara, let's start with you.
Yeah, I'm on the internet. I'm Kara Lee Corthron on Twitter. I'm Kara.Corthron on Instagram. And I'm on Facebook, but I don't look at it that much. Let's see. Please read my book. Get my book. What is it? Daughters of Jubilation. It is available now where all books are sold. You can find it pretty much anywhere. I prefer if you go to like bookshop.org, that'll actually supports indie bookstores. That's my favorite, but you can get it anywhere. And if you have Apple TV, check out Servant. It's a really fun horror show. And if you haven't seen them, Flight Attendant and You. Flight Attendant's available on HBO Max, and You is available on Netflix. I wrote for those shows as well. But yeah, something like that. One of those things.
Thank you, Kara. And Jeff, what about you? What do you got?
Kara, between Servant and Ted Lasso, I'm going to end up having to get a subscription to yet another streaming service.
Ted Lasso, so good.
There are so many worse things I could be spending my money on than another streaming service. So, hey. So, I guess buy my books, The Serpent King, Goodbye Days, Rain and Delilah's Midnight Matinee, and then my forthcoming book in August, In the Wild Light. So there we go. I'm on social media at Jeff Zentner, JeffZentner. I don't think there are that many Jeff Zentners out there, but I did get a message the other day from a lady on Facebook. She had met a Jeff Zentner while drunk at a bar in Appleton, Wisconsin, and thought it was me. And I was like, you met a guy named Jeff Zentner in Appleton, Wisconsin, who looks enough like me that you looked at the Facebook and said, this is the guy. And the fact that he lives in Nashville is not going to dissuade me. I was just, wow. Okay, sure.
Really funny.
It's very funny.
The power of social media.
Sure.
All right. So Jeff, Kara, thank you both so much for being here today. To all of our listeners, thank you for being here. We're going to be back next week, same time, same place. We are talking about, we're talking about writing conferences and writing retreats. So join us then. Again, Jeff, Kara, thank you both so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us. This was so fun.
This was great. Thank you.
See y'all later.